The old grandfather clock in the hallway had always been a silent sentinel in Elara's life, a steadfast marker of time's relentless march. Its presence was a comforting constant, a link to generations past who had also lived and breathed within the house's aged walls. But lately, a subtle shift had occurred, a creeping unease that began with the clock's once familiar chimes. It wasn't a sudden, jarring change. It was insidious, like a slow, growing mold, first appearing as a faint discoloration on the edges of perception. The hourly chimes, once a comforting melody, began to possess a slight tremor, a barely perceptible waver in their tone. Sometimes, Elara would catch a fleeting echo, a ghostly resonance that lingered just a fraction too long. She'd shake her head, attributing it to fatigue or the house's old pipes playing tricks on her ears. But the anomalies persisted. The chimes occasionally sounded muffled, as if something soft had been placed inside the clock, dampening their resonance. Elara would find herself pausing mid-task, straining to hear them clearly, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. She even started avoiding the hallway during the top of the hour, a subconscious aversion to the unsettling sounds. One dreary Tuesday afternoon, as rain lashed against the windows, the clock refused to chime at 3. An unnerving silence descended upon the house, thick and heavy like a shroud. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. She ventured into the hallway, the silence amplifying the sound of her own breathing. The clock stood tall and imposing, its pendulum swinging with its usual hypnotic rhythm. She pressed her ear against the cool, polished wood, her senses on high alert. From within the clock's belly, she heard it, a soft, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It was faint, barely audible above the drumming of her own pulse, but undeniably there. It wasn't the steady tick-tock of the clockwork, it was slower, more deliberate, and undeniably organic. Elara stumbled back, her mind racing. A trapped bird, a loose piece of the mechanism. She tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation for the impossible sound. But a cold dread had begun to take root, whispering insidious possibilities in the quiet corners of her mind. Days bled into nights, each hour marked by the clock's increasingly bizarre pronouncements. Sometimes, the chimes would be deafeningly loud, booming through the house with an almost violent intensity, making Elara jump and clutch at her chest. Other times, they were whisper quiet, barely audible, forcing her to strain her ears, her anxiety growing with each faint, unsettling note. And the thumping continued, a constant, morbid heartbeat echoing from within the seemingly inanimate object, a relentless reminder that something was terribly wrong. Sleep became a battlefield. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like approaching footsteps, every rustle of leaves outside her window like a whispered threat. The oppressive silence between the clock's increasingly erratic chimes became a breeding ground for paranoia. Elara started seeing things, fleeting shadows dancing in her peripheral vision, movements in the darkened corners of rooms that vanished when she focused on them. She would often catch her own reflection in the darkened windows, and for a fleeting moment, a stranger's face would seem to stare back, gaunt and accusing. Was the house, her sanctuary for so long, now turning against her? Or was it something far more sinister, something residing within the heart of the old clock? She tried to confide in her friend, Sarah, over the phone, but the words felt inadequate, almost comical. How could she explain the feeling of a heartbeat emanating from an old clock? Sarah, ever the pragmatist, suggested she get the clock checked by a professional, attributing her anxieties to stress and isolation. Elara knew, with a chilling certainty, that no clockmaker could fix what was happening. This was beyond repair. One particularly long and terrifying evening, as the clock prepared to strike the witching hour, Elara found herself frozen in her bed, her body rigid with fear. The thumping from the hallway had grown stronger, more insistent, almost frantic. As the minute hand inched its way towards the 12, a new sound emerged from the clock, a faint, raspy breathing. It was soft, like a sigh escaping parched lips, but undeniably present, hanging in the still night air. The first chime struck, a deep, guttural groan that seemed to claw its way up from the depths of the earth, vibrating through the very bones in Elara's body. The second chime was a choked sob, a sound of profound despair, that echoed the terror in her own heart. The third, a whispered word. Elara strained to hear it, her breath catching in her throat, her blood turning to ice. The word was her name. She scrambled out of bed, her legs shaky, and stumbled back against the wall. Her hand clamped over her mouth to stifle a scream that threatened to tear from her chest. The clock continued its macabre countdown, each chime accompanied by increasingly desperate whispers, each one her name, laced with a chilling familiarity that suggested a long and intimate knowledge. By the time the 12th chime finally tolled, the breathing had become ragged, punctuated by choked gasps, the whispers a frantic chorus of her name, each syllable imbued with a growing sense of urgency and dread. And then, silence, a silence so profound, so absolute, that it pressed against Elara's eardrums, amplifying the frantic pounding of her own heart. It was a silence more terrifying than any of the disturbing sounds that had come before, a pregnant pause before the final, inevitable horror. Elara stood frozen in the doorway of her bedroom, her eyes wide with terror, fixed on the dark silhouette of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Its pendulum continued its steady swing, a hypnotic rhythm that seemed to mock her fear. Its ornate face, usually so comforting in its familiarity, now seemed to leer at her from the darkness. Had she truly imagined it all? Was her sanity finally unraveling, her mind conjuring these terrifying sounds and whispers? Slowly, hesitantly, driven by a morbid curiosity that outweighed her paralyzing fear, she reached out a trembling hand towards the clock's door. As her fingertips brushed against the cold, smooth wood, she felt a faint vibration, a subtle tremor that ran through the very fabric of the clock. And then she heard it again. The soft, rhythmic thump, 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 closer now. Right behind the door, a wave of nausea washed over her, but she couldn't look away. She had to know. She had to confront the source of this terror, even if it meant facing her deepest nightmares. With a surge of adrenaline, fueled by pure, unadulterated fear, Elara flung the clock's door open. The interior of the grandfather clock was not filled with the intricate network of gears and springs she had always imagined. It was hollow, an empty cavity save for a single, pulsating heart, bathed in a faint, ethereal glow that seemed to emanate from within its fleshy walls. It beat slowly, deliberately, each throb sending a ripple of dread through Elara's body, and etched onto its surface, in what looked like delicate, spidery veins of crimson, was her name, swirling and intertwining like a morbid work of art. Elara stared in horrified fascination, her breath caught in her throat, her body frozen in place. She couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't tear her gaze away from the grotesque spectacle before her. The heart pulsed again, and a single, bloodshot eye slowly opened within its fleshy folds, its gaze locking onto hers, piercing through her very soul. A voice, ancient and filled with a chilling tenderness that made her skin crawl, echoed from within the confines of the clock. Tick, tock, Elara, your time has come. The eye blinked slowly, deliberately, and a wave of icy darkness washed over Elara, consuming her consciousness, silencing her screams before they could even form. The grandfather clock in the hallway continued its steady rhythm, its melody now perfectly normal, its silence once again a comforting presence in the old house. And within its hollow depths, nestled amongst the spidery veins bearing her name, a new heart had begun to beat its slow, deliberate rhythm. The cycle would continue.